The alarm buzzed at 4:45 a.m., a sharp, insistent tear in the fabric of the pre-dawn silence. Rivka Steinman's hand shot out, silencing it before its metallic shriek could fully wake the house. Beside her, Moshe stirred, his large frame shifting as he reached for the lamp on the nightstand. The sudden pool of soft yellow light illuminated a room that had become a testament to their shared enduring grief. They moved through their morning routine with the practiced efficiency of people who had performed the same sorrowful dance for years. 11 years, to be precise. 11 years of early mornings, of extra shifts, of an absence so profound it had become a physical presence in their small Teaneck home. Rivka, now 46, tied her gray-streaked hair into a severe bun, the lines around her eyes etched not by age, but by a decade of sleepless nights and unshed tears. Moshe, 52, moved more slowly, his body worn by decades of construction work, each movement a quiet protest against the weight he carried. But neither of them ever complained. Every extra dollar from their grueling schedules went into a fund for private investigators, a dwindling account that represented the last vestiges of a hope that grew thinner with each passing year. They gathered their belongings, Moshe's hard hat and battered lunch bag, Rivka's purse. Tucked inside her wallet was a worn, creased photo of two smiling boys, their faces frozen in a time before everything changed. The photo was from 1995. Elayof, then 9, had his arm thrown protectively around 7-year-old Avi's shoulders. Both wore their yarmulkes proudly, their dark peyot catching the sunlight, their eyes bright with a future they would never get to live. The October air on Palisade Avenue carried a frigid bite that promised the imminent arrival of winter. They walked in comfortable silence, their breath forming small, ghostly clouds in the darkness. The Orthodox Jewish community was already stirring, lights flickering on in the neat houses, the distant melodic sound of morning prayers drifting from an open window. This Bergen County town had been their sanctuary once, a place where their faith was understood, shared, and celebrated. Now it felt like a museum, each street corner, each storefront, a monument to a memory. The bus stop stood under a flickering streetlight at the corner of Cedar Lane. They were, as always, 5 minutes early. Moshe sat down his lunch bag and flexed his calloused fingers against the cold. Rivka pulled her thin coat tighter around her, the fabric offering little comfort. The familiar deep rumble of the Route 57 A bus announced itself before its headlights swept around the corner. The door hissed open, revealing Donald Harwick's familiar face behind the wheel. The driver, a man in his early 50s, had been running this route for as long as they could remember. His sandy hair was neatly combed, his uniform pressed with a precision that seemed to defy the early hour. "Morning, folks," Donald greeted them with his usual warmth. "Getting cold out there." "Good morning, Don," they replied in unison. A small, sad smile crossed Rivka's face. Donald had driven their boys to school on this very bus. He had been one of the last people to see them that terrible Friday morning in 1996. They paid their fare, exact change as always, and made their way to their usual seats halfway back. The bus was empty, a hollow shell that would slowly fill with the town's early risers. Rivka settled by the window, Moshe beside her, their hands finding each other in the space between them, an automatic, unconscious gesture of mutual support. The bus lurched into motion, following its predetermined path through Teaneck's sleeping streets. They passed the shuttered shops on Queen Anne Road, the darkened windows of Congregation B'nai Yeshurun, the elementary school where their boys should have graduated from years ago. Rivka's phone rang just as they passed the Jewish Community Center. The sound was jarring in the quiet bus. She fumbled for it, a frown creasing her brow, as she checked the caller ID. "Teaneck Police," she murmured to Moshe before answering. "Hello? Mrs. Steinman? This is Detective Derek Keller from the Teaneck Police Department." Rivka's grip tightened on the phone until her knuckles were white. Beside her, Moshe leaned in, his expression tense. They had received calls like this before. False leads, dead ends, profuse, useless apologies. "Yes, Detective." "What is it?" "Ma'am, I need to inform you that there's been a development in your son's case." The words hung in the air, heavy and unbelievable. Rivka's free hand found Moshe's, squeezing hard. What do you mean, a development?" Her voice was a ragged whisper. "A team of worker divers discovered some evidence this morning at the bottom of Lake Tamsin. We have reason to believe it may be connected to Eliav and Avi's disappearance." Moshe gestured for the phone, and Rivka tilted it between them so they could both hear. "What kind of evidence?" Moshe asked, his voice rough with a mix of hope and terror. "Sir, I understand you want details, but this is something you need to see for yourselves. I'm sending officers to your home now." "We're not home," Moshe interrupted. "We're on the bus heading to work. The 57A route." A pause. "I see. Can you come to the station? We can arrange transport to the site from there." "Yes," Rivka said immediately, her heart hammering against her ribs. "We'll come now." The bus was approaching the stop for the police station. She reached up and pressed the request button, the electronic ding echoing the sudden alarm in her soul. The patrol car ate up the miles between Teaneck and Lake Tamsin, its siren silent, but its speed urgent. Rivka stared out at the blur of trees, her mind a maelstrom of possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. Moshe held her hand the entire way, his grip a solid, grounding presence in a world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. As the car crested the final hill before the lake, Rivka gasped. What should have been a quiet, remote shoreline had been transformed into a chaotic hive of activity. Police cruisers lined the access road, their red and blue lights painting frantic, silent patterns across the water's placid surface. Regional authority vehicles were parked haphazardly on the grass. Men in reflective vests moved purposefully around the shoreline, their movements sharp and efficient. Detective Brennan, a tall man in his early 40s, with an intense, focused gaze, met them as they stepped out of the vehicle. "Mr. and Mrs. Steinman," he greeted them, his handshake firm but gentle. "Thank you for coming so quickly. I know this must be difficult." He led them toward the water's edge, past forensics technicians in white coveralls, who worked with methodical precision. "Here," Detective Brennan said, stopping at a cordoned-off area where several large evidence bags lay on a waterproof sheet. Rivka's knees nearly buckled. Even through the clouded plastic, she could see them. 2 small yellow backpacks, the same ones she had bought at Weinstein's department store for the new school year in 1996. Beside them, in separate bags, were 2 navy blue yarmulkes, and then, incongruously, horrifically, a large rusted metal box marked with German text, and a bronze statue of an eagle clutching a swastika in its talons. A forensics technician carefully opened the bags. The backpacks had been weighted down with stones, but the yellow fabric was still visible beneath the lake stains. Rivka reached for the first yarmulke, her hand shaking. She turned it over, and there it was. Eliav Steinman, written in her own careful handwriting, with a permanent marker on the inside band. Her vision blurred. That's my writing," she whispered. The second yarmulke bore Avi's name in the same neat script. "These are our son's things," Moshe confirmed, his voice thick with unspeakable emotion. Rivka's composure finally shattered. The sobs came from a place deep inside, 11 years of compressed grief erupting at once. Moshe pulled her against his chest, his own tears falling silently into her hair. The presence of Nazi paraphernalia with your son's belongings, the deliberate weighting of the bags. This suggests a hate crime, Detective Brennan said gently after they'd had a moment. Someone targeted your boys specifically. A hate crime. The words hung in the cold morning air, both a confirmation and a fresh wound. Detective! They all turned at the shout. Walking toward them across the grass was Donald Harwick, still in his bus driver's uniform. Sir, this is a restricted area, an officer intercepted him. It's all right, Moshe said quickly. We know him. Donald's face was creased with concern. I'm sorry to intrude. I saw all the commotion when I reached my turnaround at the Overlook. This is the last stop on my route. He looked at Rivka and Moshe, his expression full of sympathy. I'm so sorry. Those boys were good children. His eyes moved to the evidence. He leaned closer to the Nazi memorabilia. These look authentic. What makes you say that? Detective Brennan asked sharply. Donald straightened, looking slightly embarrassed. I read a lot of history in my spare time. Jewish history, World War II history, it's a personal interest. These items, the wear patterns, the manufacturer's marks, they look like genuine period pieces, not reproductions. You study Jewish history? Rivka asked, surprised despite her grief. History helps us understand the present, don't you think? Donald's expression was earnest. But I'm no expert. Just an amateur enthusiast. Detective Brennan made a note. We'll have our experts authenticate them, he said, then turned back to Rivka and Moshe. We'll need your official statements at the station. The rest of the day passed in a blur of sterile rooms and difficult questions. Rivka, numb and exhausted, found herself at her job at Goldberg's Kosher Bakery, needing the distraction of work, but unable to focus. Her boss, Rohan Mehra, a man whose callousness was a constant source of friction, had been dismissive of her emergency, demanding a police letter as proof. The familiar rhythm of baking did little to soothe her. The scent of yeast and sugar, usually a comfort, felt cloying and wrong. Her hands, usually so steady, trembled as she tried to braid challah. Her mind kept replaying the scene at the lake, the sight of her son's belongings paired with symbols of pure evil. Her co-worker, Sarah, noticed her distress. Rivka, what's wrong? I saw them, Rivka said, the words tumbling out. The backpacks. And there was a Nazi box. An eagle statue with a swastika. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth. Oh, Rivka, you should be home. I can't be home, Rivka said. The silence, it's too loud. She tried to focus on her work, but a simple task, checking their flour supply, led to another jarring discovery. They were almost out of the high-gluten flour they needed. Rohan knows, Sarah said, her voice a frustrated whisper. I've been telling him for weeks. He told me to just mix it with the all-purpose to stretch it. He doesn't understand. He's from India. He doesn't get what this means to our community. He tells us to bake it the Jewish way, like it's just a recipe. Frustration warring with her grief, Rivka went to confront Rohan. Through the thin door of his office, she could hear his voice, sharp and agitated, speaking rapidly on the phone. Need to clean up immediately. The authorities... No, there's no time. She knocked. He burst out of the office, shoving papers into a leather bag, his face slick with sweat. I have urgent matters to attend to, he snapped, pushing past her. She followed him into the parking lot. If I buy the supplies, will you reimburse me? The question made him spin around, his face flushed. You'll get your money, he spat. As he bent to retrieve the car keys he'd dropped in his agitation, his shirt rode up. There, just above his waistline, was the dark, angular edge of a tattoo. A swastika. Wait, she said, her voice a whisper. That tattoo? Rohan's face contorted with disdain. It's a Hindu swastika, a sacred symbol that existed for thousands of years before the Nazis corrupted it. He sneered. Perhaps you should educate yourself on world religions, Mrs. Steinman, instead of obsessing over your precious baked goods. He peeled out of the lot, leaving her standing in a cloud of exhaust and disbelief. The drive to Myers Baking Supply was a haze of suspicion. As she passed the NJ Transit bus depot, a movement caught her eye. A gray sedan was pulling away. In the passenger seat, she saw Rohan. At the wheel, a man with sandy hair and the broad shoulders of a bus driver. It looked like Donald. She dismissed it as a coincidence. But then, as she pulled into the supply store parking lot, she saw the same gray sedan pull into Teaneck Hardware next door. Both men got out. It was, without a doubt, Donald and Rohan. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She bought the flour, her mind racing. As she loaded the heavy sack into her trunk, they emerged from the hardware store. Donald was carrying a large, heavy-duty shopping bag. "Rivka, what a surprise!" Donald said, his friendly smile not quite reaching his eyes. "I didn't know you two knew each other," she said, trying to keep her voice even. "Small town," Donald replied smoothly. "Rohan's helping me with some electrical work at my place. Man's a genius with wiring." The explanation was plausible, but something felt wrong. As Donald loaded his supplies into his car, a necklace slipped out from under his collar. From her angle, she could see the pendant clearly. An eagle with spread wings, clutching something in its talons. It looked disturbingly similar to the statue found that morning. He saw her staring and quickly tucked it back inside his shirt. Their eyes met for a moment, and in his gaze, she saw not the friendly warmth she was used to, but something cold and calculating. "Drive safely, Rivka," he said. She couldn't go back to the bakery. She couldn't go home. On impulse, she drove to a copy shop and used one of their computers. Her friend from college, Maurice, now a journalist specializing in extremist groups, had replied to her message. "Be careful, Rivka. These people can be dangerous," she called Moshe, her voice trembling, as she recounted everything. The tattoo, the necklace, seeing them at the hardware store. "My foreman let me leave early," he said, his voice grim. "Pick me up. We'll go back to the lake, to the peaceful side, the spot we used to take the boys." The suggestion should have been repellent, but it felt right. They needed to reclaim some small part of that place from the day's horror. As they pulled into the lake's public parking area, Rivka saw it again. The gray sedan passing behind them on the access road. "That's them," she gasped, pointing. The car disappeared around a bend, turning onto an unmarked dirt road that led deep into the woods. "That's an old service road," Moshe said, his voice tight. "It's been officially closed for years." He pulled their car to the shoulder. "Stay here. I'll go look." "Absolutely not," Rivka said, her hand already on her phone. "If something's wrong, we call the police." She dialed Detective Brennan's number as Moshe disappeared into the trees. A moment later, Moshe's call came through. She put the detective on hold. "Rivka," Moshe whispered, breathless. "Their car's at the end of the trail. They're unloading something from the trunk. It's a barrel, an industrial barrel. They're carrying it toward an old boat on the shore." A pause. His breathing quickened. "Rivka. Oh, God. I heard something from inside the barrel, like scratching or knocking. There's someone in there." Her blood turned to ice. She clicked back to the detective. "They have a barrel. And my husband says there's someone inside. They're putting it in a boat. We're dispatching units immediately." Brennan's voice was sharp with urgency. "Helicopter, divers, everything. Tell your husband to stay hidden and do not engage." The next 15 minutes were an eternity. The distant thrum of helicopter rotors grew to a deafening roar. The helicopter burst over the tree line, its downdraft whipping Rivka's hair across her face. Below, she could see the small boat rocking violently. Police sirens wailed, and Brennan's car skidded to a stop beside hers. She watched through binoculars as officers rappelled from the helicopter, securing Donald and Rohan with stunning efficiency. She saw divers plunge into the water where the barrel had sunk. Long minutes passed. Then one diver surfaced, giving a thumbs up. They met the police boats at the public dock. Donald's face was a mask of cold indifference. Rohan spat on the dock, his eyes blazing with hatred. "This isn't over," he snarled at her. Then another boat arrived, and Rivka's world tilted on its axis. A small, thin figure sat huddled between two divers, a thermal blanket wrapped around his shoulders. Even soaking wet, even 11 years older, she knew him instantly. "Avi," she whispered. The boy, no. The young man, he must be 19, looked up. His eyes, those same dark, gentle eyes she had kissed goodnight a lifetime ago, met hers. "Avi!" She rushed forward, and he stumbled into her arms, collapsing against her, as if his legs could no longer hold him. He didn't speak, just clung to her, his body shaking with cold, and a trauma too deep for words. "You're safe now," she murmured, holding him tight. "Mama's here?" "Where's the other boy?" Detective Brennan asked, his voice grave. "Where's Elioff?" Donald remained silent, but Rohan laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated evil. "The lake ate him up years ago," he said with satisfaction. "Fed him to the fishes, where he belonged." The hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights and hushed, urgent voices. Avi was taken away, and they were left in a small, windowless waiting room. The doctor's report was a litany of horrors: malnutrition, old fractures, evidence of prolonged physical and sexual abuse. His lungs were scarred from a previous near drowning. Psychologically, he was in severe shock. He hadn't spoken a word. Detective Brennan filled in the rest of the monstrous story. Donald had lured the boys from the bus with the promise of a treat. He'd taken them to Rohan, who had a soundproof bunker hidden deep in the woods. They and others in their neo-Nazi cell had used the boys as symbols, a way to strike at the Jewish community they despised. 3 years in, Elioff had tried to escape. Donald and Rohan had killed him, sinking his body in the lake. Avi had witnessed it all. Later, sitting outside Avi's room, they saw him sleeping, looking impossibly young and fragile. The horror of what had been done was almost unbearable. But they would bear it. Avi needed them. "I want to knit again," Rivka said suddenly. The words a small, defiant act of creation in the face of so much destruction. "I want to make a shawl for Avi. Something that says home." Moshe nodded, his eyes fixed on his surviving son. "I need to go to temple, speak with the rabbi. We should say Kaddish for Elioff properly now, and a prayer of thanksgiving that Avi came home." They sat in silence, hands clasped, drawing strength from each other, as they had for 11 agonizing years. Through the window, Avi stirred in his sleep. They watched him breathe, each rise and fall of his chest, a small, precious miracle. Their family would never be whole again, but what remained would be cherished.